and welcome back to another episode of the Young Dad Podcast. Whether you're outside grilling, mowing the lawn, changing dirty diapers, chasing those little rugrats around, or maybe you finally got a moment to sit back, relax, and listen to your favorite podcast, whatever you're doing, wherever you're at, thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jay, and today I have an incredible guest who's helping merge the world of parenting and pet ownership in a way that's both innovative and heartwarming. Joining me today is Eileen, a devoted mother, loving wife, and seasoned canine behavior consultant with over a decade of experience. Eileen's journey as a dog trainer took a transformative turn when her daughter was born. The arrival of her child not only reshaped her dog training business, but also deepened her understanding of the relationship between dogs and children. She became passionate about protecting her daughter while nurturing her love for dogs. This led to develop the Baby Pack Leader course, designed to help expecting parents prepare their dogs for the newest member of the family. Through her work, Eileen has assisted countless families in introducing their dogs to their babies, troubleshooting behavior problems as child grows, and fostering harmonious relationships between pets and tots. She believes that space is respect, know what you want, and start teaching early are the pillars of successful dog-child interaction. Today we'll dive into her philosophy, explore the challenges and joys of raising children alongside dogs, and learn how to create a safe and loving environment for all family members, two-legged and four-legged alike. So grab a seat, maybe even your furry friend for this one, and let's welcome Eileen to the show. Eileen, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course, I'm super excited for you to be here. Super excited to talk about this. I've had many dogs and a couple kids along the way, and so it's always interesting to talk about these topics that are like really cool that I've dealt with, and ones that like I haven't really thought too much about because I've never really had too much issue with merging dogs and children together. My first dog that I had, just some backstory here. I had my oldest daughter. At the time, we had a couple cats, but then the cats were really annoying, and my oldest daughter at the time was showing like signs of like being allergic. So we got rid of the cat and rehomed them. But then we got this dog from the shelter. She was a 6.5-year-old golden retriever. Absolutely beautiful dog, just beautiful. Love of my life in dog form, and I absolutely love this dog. She was older, and the reason she was in the shelter was because of dog aggression. This was the sweetest, most loving little dog ever. And so we got this dog just a few months after the child was born. And so there's so many pictures that we have of those two. She was just the sweetest. The baby would just lay on her while she was laying down on her side. The baby would just lay on her like a pillow to like prop her up kind of thing. And she would just lay there for hours together. They were the best of friends. She passed like 3 years ago. And then we got another puppy. So now we have 2 dogs and a cat, and it's just been a wild and crazy ride with these 2 dogs because an Australian Shepherd Lab mix is a lot different than a Golden Retriever in comparison.
Yeah. Totally
and
different energy levels.
Another child to this picture, so yeah. But he's real sweet. He's real sweet. And then we also got a Chihuahua, and he's just annoying. He whines a lot, like a lot. He's very whiny, but the kitten's really cool. The kitten's cute, so. Yeah, but I love animals. I never thought about I'm like, oh, they'll just merge, they'll learn to live together kind of thing. Like just when you introduce another animal to, like introduce the cat, like we'll swap their scents, we'll swap their blankets for a bit, keep them close but separate, and then, slowly start to integrate them. I think we've had the cat for like a month now, and so they're just barely starting to integrate a little bit more.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Windows. Starting to go slow. That's perfect. Yeah. And we like to do the same thing with the dogs and the kids for sure. So when they, when we know I work with people like 2 primary phases. The first is when they have dogs and they are expecting a child and they're scared and they're nervous, either because the dog is like a really happy-go-lucky dog that's used to being able to like be with the people and the visitors who come over. And then the second most popular time I meet with people is when kids start walking, and dogs aren't used to it. And so, there's a lot of parents, they just don't know what to do. So I'm always happy, and every situation is a little bit different. So I think a lot of times people who are taking things slow, and that is in their innate nature to do that with animals and give them time and help them adjust, they don't have nearly as many setbacks as the ones who think that nothing bad is going to happen ever because their dog loves everybody. And so they kind of set themselves up for disappointment when they just don't prepare the dog at all and don't take any time. And the dog is like, oh, wow, now I have to live with this thing all the time. And nobody has given me any direction or allowed me to, ease into the process. And so, that's usually where people struggle if they're not taking any time or if they're ignoring signs, or just assuming that because their dog has always liked people, that it will continue to having a small, crying, moving infant that grows into a toddler in the house.
Yeah. And it can be really hard to because you hear that and it's like, well, how the heck do I prepare a dog for a human, But one thing we don't think about is that dog's going to have to be, if the dog's used to sleeping in the room, and now we don't want the dog sleeping in the room, now we have to sleep train the dog to be somewhere else, right?
Yeah, it's all of those,
be in a new space
those little things
for this many hours.
Yeah, totally. If a dog its whole life has slept up until the bed until the day the baby's born, and then all of a sudden you bring the baby home, and the dog can't do those things anymore, the dog's like, what's the heck? We've always slept together. Now you want me to do something different? And it can create a lot of stress for the animal. So it's really all I kind of want people to do in the beginning is start doing those things before the baby comes home. So one, if the dog is uncomfortable, that's a great example, sleeping outside of the bedroom. It's one of the biggest rules that I have, that especially if you have your baby in a bedside bassinet or the baby sleeping in your room. I know for me, when I had both of my kids, I lived in my bed for a month. That's where everything happened. That's where sleeping happened, feeding happened, snuggling happened, relaxing happened. If I could sleep, all of those things. And that was one of the things that we had our dogs do. Was one was 15 and he slept kennel in the room, but he just, that way he wasn't getting in the way or getting underfoot. He couldn't hear, so he slept through everything. And then the younger ones ended up sleeping outside of our room, in our living room on the couch. And some dogs have a hard time with that adjustment. And so it's easier, on the parents and their marriage, and they're going through this big change with each other. If you bring home this baby and the baby is crying, and now you've kicked the dog out of the room and the dog is crying, that is such a stressful way to exist in your house. So I always joke that as much as I'm there to train the dog, I'm also there to do a small amount of marriage counseling, because, just having kids is wreaks havoc on a relationship. It's very, very challenging. It's very difficult to go through that transition from 2 to 3. The two of you live your life together, and then you add in this baby. It completely changes the relationship. And then you've got the dog barking in the background. It's the perfect recipe for an overstimulated, frustrated exchange with your partner.
Most definitely. And dogs hear, well, unless they don't hear anything, but they hear everything, right? And then they react, and they get up and they start moving and they start reacting, and sometimes they'll bark, or sometimes they'll whine, or sometimes they'll just start moving and jumping and bouncing, and that can just be so fun when the baby's sleeping and then they just hear one little noise. Maybe the baby just farted or something, but dogs can hear it. And that woke them up, and now they're barking because that's a weird noise, right? All these noises are new to the dog. The dog's not used to all these noises, so that's a big thing too. That's going to be a part of it, in the preparation, because you can't really prep the dog for the noises the baby's going to make, because you as a parent, you don't know what noises the baby's going to make. You can't prep it for random crying. You can't prep the dog for, the body noises it's going to make or anything like that, and when they're going to make it. So it really disturbs the dog's pattern too, right? Yeah. The dog's used to going to sleep at 9 o'clock and waking up at 6 a.m. to go outside, and it's a nice restful 8-9 hours, and they're happy and they're content. Now all of a sudden, to their environment, there's crying, there's whining. You guys are up more, so they think they're going up more, and they're going out more, but they're not going out more. You're just up more, and they're confused why you're up more because they can't read a clock, and it's all these things, right?
Exactly. No, that's exactly what happens.
Those things we just don't think about it though, right? We have a dog. We're like, okay, dog, good. Baby, good. Merged together, good. Easy.
Yeah.
But we don't think about all the little intricacies in between, right?
Yeah, like, is the dog going to be afraid of the rocker? Is the dog, like, the new thing is the Mamaroo, and it, like, goes in circles and it bounces around and it has, like, a motor, so it's making noise, or like a dog that's always been allowed to sleep on the couch, and all of a sudden you have this, like, baby lounger on the couch, like a Dock-a-Tot or a Snuggle Me or whatever, and the dog wants to jump up and use it as a pillow, and the baby's in there. So those are all things that I want people to take out before baby arrives, to set a boundary that's like, hey, we need to give this space a buffer. Like, this is not a pillow that you get to put your, dirty. I think about, I have like a germ thing with dogs, and people are like, do you let your dogs on the furniture? And I'm like, well, yeah, like if I want to snuggle and I want to like be with them. Yeah. I was like, but I also think all the time about, like, they don't wear shoes. Their feet are dirty. Especially at my house, where I also have a boarding facility. My dog played with 15 other dogs this morning and was rolling on the ground. And I'm like, so they all pee on the ground, and then she rolls on the ground, and then I'm supposed to put her, like, on my couch. Like, that's gross. So I have like a germ thing with the dogs. And I'm like, I just think that when you have a brand new little baby, like, we should just go ahead and set that boundary. And if you end up not needing to have that boundary, then, like, great. It's really easy to give freedom back. But it's really tough to get into a negative pattern and then change it and set a new rule, especially when, like, like I said, like, the postpartum period, or what they call the fourth trimester, is exhausting. It's like graduating when you get to, like, around the 3-month mark. Those first few months are really hard, and it's just like people don't have the bandwidth to deal with any issues that the dog is having. And so I tell people, like, make sure you're booking. If your dog requires grooming, don't wait until you look over and your doodle is a haircut to call your groomer, because they're not going to be able to fit you in, last minute. Maybe they're nice and they will. Just go ahead and get that stuff on your calendar, just like you do your pediatrician appointment, so you don't have to worry about it. So, like, my goal when I meet with those people who are expecting is to just be like, I want you to have a plan. Like, I don't have like a one plan fits everybody thing, but let's go through and make a plan together and think about the places where, like, you're not prepared, because it is really hard. And I want you to dedicate whatever energy you have to the things that are, like, to be prioritized, making sure your baby is safe and healthy, making sure your marriage is somewhat on the tracks, and, taking care of yourself. It's a challenging, that whole, you say when a baby turns 1, you're not just celebrating that the baby's 1, you're celebrating that you made it through the first year. And it's full of joy and high highs, but it is also, work, effort, and kind of, that's good. And these are all given, you have a healthy, labor and a baby that is very textbook. It's still hard. And so when you have, secondary challenges of, like, baby needs to be in the NICU, or you have, like, a traumatic delivery, like, other things that can make this time even more difficult than it already is, I don't want people to be afraid of those things, but I want them to know that they're a possibility for sure. Like, it can happen. More people that I work with who go through this time, the more I learn about the different things that can happen. And, they're not all a big deal, but, we had a client who, like, oh, I'm due August 10th. And I was like, awesome. So we block out, like, 2 weeks. Baby is generally either, a week early or a week late. First babies, I'm always like, oh, they're probably going to be, baby's going to show up late. And then she calls me, she says, hey, I really think the baby is going to come in July. And I was like, okay, cool. As long as it's not the 4th of July, because that's our busiest weekend of the year. Hands down. We book out really early. And she goes, oh, I promise. June 30th. So she calls me. She's like, so I'm going to the hospital and I'm going to have the baby. And the baby is like 2.5 months early. I can't do the math on weeks right now off the top of my head, but very early.
That's real early.
Yeah. And she was like, I'm so sorry. Will you be able to keep them, over the 4th of July? She had 2 dogs. And I was like, we will make it work. Like, and I'm not going to put policy in front of your face while you're going through this. Like, it's scary. Like, to know that your baby's coming so early.
Yeah. That's especially like delivering babies. Yeah.
Yeah, like then that was the first time that I dealt with a client who normally we keep the dogs and then help them introduce the dogs to the baby. And that was the first time that they came home and their baby was left in the NICU for a month. So then they had the baby, coexisted with the dogs for a month, and then had to go back and bring the baby home. And I was like, that must be so confusing for the dogs because mom's different. The dynamic is different. Things are already changing, but it's also kind of the same, but there's no reason that they're different. And it was really interesting to see how even that dynamic just changed things. And so, it's really my job just to be there to support them no matter what. And that's kind of the nature of anytime you do anything with babies, you're on the baby schedule. You're not on your schedule at all.
And it's interesting that you mentioned like the dogs are confused and they pick up on things because mom's different, right? Like their doggy mommy's different. Mm-hmm. But we don't think, we know, but we don't really think about it too much, or at least in detail. At least majority of people, I feel, don't really think like, okay, dog's picking up on, okay, I hear 2 heartbeats coming from you, but now I only hear 1 heartbeat coming from you. I only ever heard 1 from dad, so he's only got 1, but you had 2, now you have 1 again. So what happened to that other heartbeat? Your emotions are all over the place. I smelled blood, essentially. Yeah. Now I'm confused. Are you okay? Are you hurt? All these things are going off. All their senses are going wild because their senses are already so much higher than us as humans. So they're not hearing and they're not smelling and they're not picking up on what they picked up on, just a day ago. And then they're going to boarding and then they're coming back from boarding and they're going to boarding again in just a few weeks. So they're like, what the heck is going on? Like, are you traveling the world? Things like that. Like, I don't get it. But, when you dropped me off, you look like this. When you came back, you look like this. When you smelled like this, I heard this. Now I don't hear this. So we don't think about all those big different elements for the dog, right? And, also, when it comes to policy and things like that, there's always exceptions, right? You always can make exceptions because you just never know, right? You have to be somewhat flexible and kind of try to figure it out however you can and make it work for those extreme situations, right? Like there's always exceptions, right? There's always the extreme.
And definitely, I tell people, like, however it works out, don't not contact me because I have a policy. Like, I once had a client, she was 75. She wasn't having a baby. She was just a regular dog training client. And she had a heart attack on 4th of July. And instead of calling me to say, Eileen, I had a heart attack, I'm going to the hospital, will you please go get my dog? She waited until the next morning and said, well, he's been alone since last night. And I was like, I would have made it happen. It was fine. Everything happens on 4th of July. Right. We brace for it. We know things aren't going to go right. But yeah, I mean, I love that you talked about like how different we are and how much confusion it can create for the dogs, because that's really where the recipe for behavior problems begins. So like when the dog is stressed and experiencing all of those things and we don't help them and we don't give them direction, that's when they go like, well, you don't have any information for me, so I'll just do what I think is best. And for many dogs, those are not great things. Or like, that's the baby. Everything was fine until that showed up. So let me go and help you by controlling the baby. And, I don't want, when I say like, I don't want to scare people, like, I don't want everyone thinking that I think their dog is going to try to eat their baby. That is not the issue that is my number one concern. It happens. It's terrible. It's tragic. It's a real thing that has happened to families. And so I don't want to dismiss that, but like,
I thought you were 100% joking that that's happened.
Oh no, dogs kill newborns all the time.
Easy.
Yeah. So like, that's not, it is a real thing, and it's horrific and it's sad, and they'll be like, it came out of nowhere. And I'm like, it didn't come out of nowhere. The event in and of itself is a traumatic event for the dog. And if they're not getting information, or they're not getting exercise, or they're not getting, their routine changes dramatically, and they're like, well, you were fine until that thing showed up. So let me go ahead and eliminate your source of stress, is kind of like the correlation that I see when that happens. But it's not the number one concern on my mind when I go in to work with people. It's a real thing that has happened. Dogs have definitely killed babies, newborns. It's horrible. It's tragic. And dogs definitely maul kids. That's sad. That's tragic. And a lot of times when you read those stories, you can be like, well, there definitely were signs, or that person definitely made a bad decision. And we don't think we're ever going to make those decisions. But the majority of people who are calling me are not the stories that you read in the paper. Really, people who thought nothing bad would ever happen. And it's not, and the dog was fine until it had a very chaotic event in its life. And then behavior problems came out of that. So like, I talked about how a lot of people call me when their kids start walking. So like the big thing that changes is when they're little, they're in your belly. And then once they're born, you're carrying them around on your chest. So there's like this natural progression that the baby is still very much like a part of the adult, of the parents. And then all of a sudden, when the baby's walking around on its own, when you're holding it, the dog can enter the baby's space and leave whenever it feels it needs to. But when the toddler or the newly walking baby can enter the dog space and the dog doesn't know that it can leave, or it doesn't know where it can go, and you don't have an adult like guiding that's when the dog starts to be uncomfortable, especially if we're expecting the dog to tolerate very uncomfortable things. Some dogs love kids. They really, really do. They're naturals. It's in their DNA. It's genetics. It's just how they are. And even with those dogs, I just tell people, like, how you were saying, like, your dog and your baby got along great. I'm sure you still were like, oh, okay, like every once in a while we need to step in and like guide this interaction or give space or take a break. And that's what I want parents to do. I want them to be a coach, a lifeguard there to monitor the situation and not wait for catastrophe, but be like, oh, I can see where this is going to go. Let's everybody take a break.
Yeah. No, and I think that's important too. As our children get older and they start to walk and, they start to follow the dog, essentially. Toddlers are savage, right? And toddlers don't care. Like, right? No, they don't care. But like for this cat, let's say, my 4-year-old will just pick her up and carry her around like this all day. Whenever she's here, she just picks her up and carries her like this. She doesn't do this to her, though. But she just carries her around all day, is rough with her, is like, come here, and just like squeezing her and stuff. And she bites me because she knows it's me, and she's very playful with me, but she doesn't do anything to her, right? And she knows how to run, but I do have to go through and I have to walk my little one through those interactions. Like, okay, she's meowing, she's running away, just like, let's leave her alone, right? Let's disengage from her, kind of thing.
Take a break. Everyone take a breather.
Yeah, everyone step aside. But toddlers are the worst when it comes to these things because they don't understand personal space. They don't understand not to grab a dog by the face because they just put their little hands anywhere where they can, kind of keep their hands. And maybe that's in the dog's eye. And the dog doesn't really like that. And the dog doesn't know what to do because the dog's like, oh, what the? Stop. And it's just like, what the heck just happened? How do I react to that? Kind of thing. And so the dog sometimes, at least in my experience, my dog's never bit my children, but there was some like nips, like a warning nip, like a little kind of thing, like don't do that kind of thing, like back up and catch out real quick. Even toddlers pick up on that, like, oh, that wasn't normal.
Yeah. And I
like they can pick up on those like different things.
Yeah, and I really just want, like, we just got, so last year, so when my daughter was born, we had 4 dogs. And the older ones were like 13, 14, and 15 at the time. And then right before my son was born, one of those dogs who, like, by the time had passed, the 15-year-old dog passed away 2 weeks before my son was born. And then right after that, our 16-year-old Pomeranian passed away. And then right after that, our 14-year-old pit bull passed away. And it was like so sad because and explaining like, our dogs aren't with us anymore. They're like on a new journey. And she was talking about how she missed them and like all of this stuff. And, we were really grieving and dealing with the throes of like 2 under 2 and all of that. And we finally just got, a new puppy weeks ago. And we went and met with like 30 dogs before we chose her. And these were all through various rescue organizations, and ended up finding this dog. And I drove 7 hours to go get her. And I drove 8 hours back. Traffic was terrible on the way back, all in one day. And we bring her home, and her temperament was like amazing with the kids. And it's so funny because she when she's with dogs and plays with dogs, she's like a psychopathic wild animal. And then when she's with the kids, she does things that like you can't even teach a dog, really. She's just so naturally like respectful of them. And my daughter is like obsessed. So when you're talking about like the cat and your daughter, I'm laughing because every night she's like, I want to take Billy for a walk. And I'm like, okay, we'll take Billy for a walk. I want to walk her on the leash. And she'll like ride, she'll like walk, and the dog's on the leash, and the dog listens to her. And I realized during these walks how much my daughter just does exactly what I do. And so that started to expand to like, she sees me ride a bike with a dog trotting next to it. And then she wanted to take her bike out with our little puppy and like ride her little bike while holding the dog. And it was the cutest thing to see her just emulate everything that I did. And then like, she wanted to feed the dog the way that I feed the dog. And she just started like taking over such a big responsibility. And I think like, it made me think about how us as parents, when we have kids that are like in that like 2 to 4, I don't know. I've only made it up to almost 4. I don't have experience with 5, 6, 7, 8 yet. I'm only up to 4, but personal one-on-one. And I'm like, wow, they just do exactly what we do. So like, if she saw me put my face in the dog's face, she would probably do that. If she saw me pick up the dog, she probably would do that. And so what I'm realizing now, like with the toddler thing is I'm like, I just coach parents all the time. Like, don't ever do anything like they're little fun. I mean, like if you swear, they swear. If you like, we've been guilty of that. And I just like when I have
all the time
people that work with the kids that are that age and they're like, oh, well, my kid is doing this. And I'm like, well, do you do it now? Like now that I've kind of like seen this pattern, and they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, then you just need to treat the dog exactly the way that they treat the dog. And then I think sometimes parents and myself kind of go through this grief where we're like, oh, it's another one of those things that's like different now that you have kids, and you're like, oh, I can't just like be with my dog the way that I want to be with my dog because I got to be an example all the time. And it's an interesting experience to come full circle and see that like that they just do exactly what I do with her. Even my 19-month-old, he saw me take her, like I was moving the dog. I took the dog by the collar to like put her in her crate, like walk her in. And then I see him the next day. He's got the dog he's holding the collar. And I had to be like, oh no, we can't do that. Like you can't grab her like that. You're too little. You don't know what you're doing. And he's like, no, I want to jump, puppy. And I'm like, no. So I was like, I go to my husband. I go, we can't move the dog around by her collar anymore because Rowan's dragging her around the yard. And he's like, oh, checks out. This age is tough.
Those things are, those ages are hard. They are really hard, especially for the kids because they just don't get it. They just don't. They don't know, right? And when we're talking behaviorally, and so I'm going to preface this and then I'm going to ask you a question, but our kids are sponges, right? And one thing I preach all the time on the podcast, like I will literally preach this from the tallest hill, is if your kid is hateful towards other kids at school, you need to take a good long look in the mirror because that hatefulness is probably coming from you. If your kid's really kind to others and charitable and just really kind and sweet, you can pat yourself on the back, right? Most of that, some of that's going to be nature, but a lot of that's going to be nurture, right? We go into the whole nature versus nurture argument. I'm a mental health clinician. We don't have to get into all that. But, if you're mean to animals, your kid's going to be mean to animals. But if you're kind to animals and you do these things where it's like you're saying, like your daughter wants to, ride her bike with the dog on the side trotting next to her. She wants to take her on walks and she wants to do these things and all these things, like you feed them a certain way and do all these things and routines and habits, things like that. Like 4 is like the perfect age to start teaching that responsibility, especially with dogs, especially with animals, right? To teach our responsibility because it's a really easy, repetitive thing to do, right? Take the dog out, walk the dog, pick up the poop, feed the dog. It's very easy habit forming. Your kids should be learning habits incredibly early. 3, 4 years old is about when you want to start teaching them how to do habits and routines, things like that, and get them involved, whether that's washing dishes or helping with the pets or cleaning up after themselves. If they don't start doing it around 3, 4 years old, it's going to be real hard to teach them when they're 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. But even though when they're 7 and they're used to doing it for the last 4 years of taking care of dogs, you're still going to get a fight every single day saying, why do I have to do it? Like, just do it. because you know you're supposed to do it when you're here. I'm definitely speaking from experience. Shout out to my oldest kid. And it's funny, and sorry, I'm like having an ADHD moment here, but you mentioned everything happens on the 4th of July. My oldest daughter was born July 3rd. And so everything does happen around the 4th of July. So it's a crazy time of year. And then my other one was born November 1st. So we just celebrated her birthday a couple days ago at the time of this recording. And, you know, it's like holidays, like Halloween and 4th of July are two of the busiest times of year because we have a birthday, then a holiday, and then a holiday, then a birthday. And it's my 4-year-old now she's a sugar addict. And so Halloween and birthday is just like the perfect combo for her because she gets all the candy and all the sugar and all the things. And it's just like a week worth of nothing but candy and sweets and deliciousness. And
mood swings.
Just the happiest kid. So many toddler mood swings. She's the worst. She has the worst mood swings. But she's great. But
I know. I always say, I'm like, it must be so hard to be like 4. Like it must be like so challenging. And our new thing, like you were talking about chores with my she's almost 4. She'll be 4 in January. But it's just weird to say 3.5 because I feel like if you look at a 3-year-old day 1, 3, and then like 3-year-old day before they turn 4, it's like a totally different people.
It's a completely different person. 3 has to be the hardest year of toddlerhood. It's because you learn there's so much growth in year 3. From 3 to 4, I look at her, like it's a different child.
And I'm like, it must be such a challenge to like I'm 39 and I can't control my emotions like a good chunk of time. And she's 3 and we're getting frustrated at her that she like doesn't. But her new thing when you're talking about helping, when I can see the like attitude coming, I'll go, hey, do you want to help me whatever fold laundry? Do you want to help me clean this? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, kids and dogs. I spent so much of my dog training career being like, kids and dogs aren't the same because people would be like, this is my baby. And I'm like, no, it's not your baby. It's a dog. And then I was like, kids and dogs aren't the same. And then now that I'm with them, I'm like, kids and dogs are exactly the same. When they're being annoying and they're being difficult, give them something to do that is productive, that builds a self-esteem, that makes them feel like a contributing member to the household. Like, and you can't expect something that hasn't had their energy drained or has been cooped up all day to like sit still and cooperate. And so I tell people, I'm like, if it is your baby, then like you need to fulfill it and you need to do these certain things. Mm-hmm. But it's just so funny because now I look at my puppy who's like just about 6 months, and that's like kind of a annoying puppy age too. Cause I'm like, oh, you just want to be like a squirmy wormy. You're going from being this like sleepy puppy to this playful adult dog who's like pushing boundaries and learning new things. And I've also got this child who's pushing boundaries and learning new things. And they're like very parallel right now. And it's interesting to just be like, okay, you need a job and you need a job. So like when we walk them together, I'm like, oh, they're both busy. Like they're both dedicating their energy to a joint purpose. And it has been, not that I say like the answer to all problems in toddlerhood is to like give them a pet, but it's been such an interesting experience to see her. Yeah, she loves the dog. She wants to play with the dog. She wants to do all those things. But like when it comes to the caring for the animal part, it's probably like the warmest moments in our day. Like my husband and I are like, oh my God, we are doing a good job. Look at her. Absolutely. She's like great. Like when you see your kid do something impressive that you didn't like teach them to do. So like when they're little, you're like, say car, save, and they do it. And you're like, oh my gosh, you're adorable. But when they grow up as like individual humans that are just doing good things, and you're like, I didn't ask you to say that. I didn't ask you to do that. This is just who you are. It's like a moment where you're like, oh my gosh, it's all worth it. This one moment.
100%. No, I 100% agree. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned that like dogs and toddlers are so similar because you think for a dog, right? And I learned this from something, I don't remember. I think I learned this from like a TED Talk or something, but dogs' growth isn't as linear as it's been laid out to us, right? Where it's like for one every human year, it's 7 dog years, right? It's like, no, that first year of a dog's life, that's like 9 human years, right? It just averages out over time to be 7 human years. But that first year of their life, they're going through probably ages 1 through 10 of a human in 1 year. Like they're going through so much growth in that second year of their life. They're going from, 8 to 15, 16, right? In that third year, they're going from 16 to 25. And then after that, it starts to slow down. Then it's like 7 years after that kind of thing. But those first 3 years of their life, they're going from literally 0 to 30 almost.
Mm-hmm.
Human years with the brain growth and brain development and everything like that. And so they're picking up on all these habits and, behaviors and brainwaves and things like that. Like they're growing and developing all the time.
Yeah, they're going through various like imprint stages. Yeah, people ask me.
Yeah, and so then we think about toddlers too, right? Oh, no, you're good. I was going to say, like, for toddlers too, and for our children, they're going through such rapid growth in these first few years, right? And we have these high expectations. Like, okay, well, control yourself. Like, when you feel sad, so just feel sad. But they're literally 3. Like, they're literally 3. You're full adult, and you still struggle with this. But we expect our children who are little and in grade school or in preschool to control themselves and to be able to have a grasp on their emotions. Like, okay, let's think about that. And then we think about a dog too at the same time. It's like, oh, well, you're 2 years old now. Like, you should be able to understand this and be able to do it this way and know, like, this is how you do it. But it's like they are growing and developing. It's like, oh, well, you're 2 years old now. Like, you should have your energy a little bit lower. It's like, no, they're just a hyperactive teenager, right?
Yeah. Well, and I tell people,
not ready to mellow out yet.
The other way they're really similar is, like when it comes to, I would say like I don't know if you want to call it parenting or like, I hate the word discipline because people are like, discipline is something you do or something you give. And I'm like, no, discipline like is being consistent. Like, so like going to the gym is a discipline for me. I go every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday. Like that is my schedule. That is my routine. So like, I don't like using the word discipline, but like in terms of how we manage, or like when people say like, oh, I corrected the dog. And I'm like, okay, well, like, did you correct the dog or did you like, or like, can we like teach the dog instead? So I always talk about like how even when I'm dealing with my child who's experiencing like just this morning, she woke up, her brother had a car and she had a car, but she wanted both cars. So she's like, I want him to share with me. And I'm like, well, sharing isn't when someone just gives you what you want, first of all. Sharing is when he's done with the car, you can have the car. And this, I'm trying to explain this concept of, she says, I want to share that with you. It means she's meaning I want to take something from you. I want you to give me something. And I'm like, it's not sharing. And I'm trying to like explain this concept to her. And eventually it results in her taking both cars and throwing them. And I had said, and she had done it like once before. And she was like, I want my cars back. And we gathered them and I brought them to her. And I said, look, if you throw the cars again, we're going to have to go take a break. Right. And she throws the cars again. And I walk her down the hallway and we sit in her room together and she's crying and she's screaming. And I'm sitting there with her. And I'm like, I'm here when you're ready to talk. Like, I want to help you through this. And it kind of like gets herself real tired and she looks at me and she's like, I want to go eat my oatmeal. And I was like, okay, can we talk about just what happened? Like what just happened? And, we can't throw the cars. It's dangerous. We can hurt people. And then I always go, bring it in. And then she's like, she collapses in my arms and we have a big hug. And I'm like, okay, let's go together. Let's go leave the room together. We'll sit down. We'll have breakfast together. And I kind of do the same thing with dogs. So if I have a dog, like I used to work with a lot of high-end like anxiety and aggression. And now I work with a lot of like very family dogs. But when you have a dog that wants to like eat you or hurt you or harm you or get you away from them, you kind of have to do the same thing. Like, hey, I'm here to be a part of the conversation when you would like to have a similar conversation. But we can't have a conversation in which you hurt me. Right. But I'll be here protecting myself. And when you're ready, and like, it's kind of the same thing with the dogs. And they would go through it and go through it and go through it, whether they're like in a crate and they don't want you to come near the crate, or they're being held by their owner and they don't want you to approach the owner, like things like that. You just kind of have to let them go all the way through it. And you can't just be like, stop. You can't just suppress it or stop it from happening or stop it in its tracks. You kind of just have to like ride it out. And then at the end be like, okay, well, like now that we're on the same page, we can have a conversation. And so it's interesting that like all the work I did with dogs makes it super easy because she's not trying to hurt me. She's just trying to express herself. And I was always able to see that with dogs, that I'm like, you just want everything to be copacetic. And she just wants all the cars. But yeah, we're always like, you can't,
that's simple.
You know, and I'm here when you're ready to talk. Like, and it's just interesting that like with the kids, that's kind of always our pattern. And the more that we do that with her when she has these moments, like, you know, we go to a smaller space where her voice isn't so loud, where nobody's watching. And then we kind of like support her through. And I'm like, oh, I do the same thing with dogs. And the more that we do that for her, the more predictable it becomes to her that we're not leaving, no matter how angry you are. We're here for you when you're ready to talk about it. But I'm like, that's, you know, and when we do that with the dogs, they learn to trust us also. And so I'm like, I hope I'm creating trust with her that like, you can be angry, you can be sad, you can be upset. But like, we're not leaving you, you know? And I think that's, I don't know, I kind of got off the rails, but I feel like there's a parallel there between like everything I ever did with dogs who were experiencing big emotions. But I will still say there's nothing, the toddler tantrums can be far more like emotionally triggering for ourselves, like for me, because I'm like, I am also used to working with like, you know, like with the dogs, they're not talking back to me. They have body language, but they're not saying anything to me. So sometimes when they say stuff, you're like, oh, that was so mean. Heroes are mean.
Heroes are awful. They're so mean. But no, what you're talking about, you know, here is one of the few parts of like a gentle parenting model that I do agree with. I don't agree with most gentle parenting because I think it's just giving in way too much to your child. I think it's giving in far too much and not actually disciplining them or actually teaching them. But that one part that you're mentioning here is called co-regulating. And that's one of the few parts of gentle parenting that I do agree with. I think that's just parenting in general. It should just be a parenting thing. But co-regulation is really important because, again, it goes back to that modeling. It goes back to that behavior. If your child can know that you're going to be calm and so it's okay to feel this, but we're going to get through it. We're going to regulate our emotions together. That teaches them how to do it because, again, they're little. They're 3-4 years old. They only have a 3 to 4 year old brain. That's all they got. That's all they're working with, right? They don't have a bunch of skills and tools and years of experience and years of brain waves to cope and get through it. They literally have 3 years of craziness and rapidness and growth that's like insanity because they went from just popping out one day to now we're here and you're telling me to not be sad or to calm down, and I don't really know how to calm down from this specific thing, and it's really new and confusing. And it's the same with the dog. It's like dogs don't get it, but they just kind of need us to like be there. They want to test us out. They want to like wait us out. It's like, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, what are you gonna do?
How are you gonna do this?
Exactly. That was the point that I was meaning to make before I totally got off the rails. That like if you say you're gonna do something, and this is the other thing that I learned with dogs is like your word is as good as gold. So like don't make a threat unless you're willing to follow through on it. So like with the dog, if you're like, I'm going to get him over there and I'm going to tell you it, or I'm going to put you away. Like when I go in and I look at a family and I see how they talk to their kids and I see how they talk to their dog, I'm like, there's no follow through on any of this. Like when you're talking about the gentle parenting, and I'm like, yes, like we want to be gentle, but the part that they need, both dogs and kids, is the follow through. If you say you're going to do something, you need to do it. If you say we're going to get up from the table, then you're going to get up from the table. But the thing is people make threats that they don't actually have any intention on following through on, or they make threats because they think it'll create compliance. And so really the part that is important for both of them is like, if you say you're going to do something, then do it. Otherwise, they just learn that you're inconsistent and you don't really mean it. So like if you're going to
100%, exactly.
You know, like with the dog, instead of just saying like, oh, I corrected the dog, like there has to be an education in which you're like, this is what I want you to do instead. And like, that's kind of the co-regulating with your pet that like, oh, I don't want you near the baby. Like when let's say they're brand new and the dog repeatedly jumps up on the couch and mom's alone and dad has gone back to this is like a very typical like family. And it's what my family looks like. So that's usually how I talk about it. So like dad has gone back to work, mom's alone with dogs and kids. Dog jumps up on the couch. I always say it's like 1, 2, follow through. So if the dog does it once and you take the dog off, and the dog does it twice and you take the dog off, then you follow through and you eliminate its freedom, right, with the dog. And so I think like that rule with my kids of like, you have a chance to make a mistake, and then the second time I'm going to set a boundary, and then where there's got to be the follow through, or they just keep going and they don't learn anything. And that's the same thing with the dogs. People are like, no, 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 no. And I'm like, where is the education? But those are the hardest houses to go into because I have to walk a line of, I'm like, look, I'm the dog expert, but like, if you're not going to set, like, I help a lot of people rehome dogs. And I think it's because a lot of people get to the point where they feel really overwhelmed and they just can't do anything well. Like they feel like they're not doing any part of their life well. And I'm like, well, let's just eliminate this huge source of stress so you can focus on the most important thing, which is your kids. And I do that a lot.
Yeah.
So like I'll go and I'll meet with parents and they're like, I have 2 kids under 2 and a 115-pound dog, and I am sleeping 2 hours a night and I feel like I'm going to lose my mind. And I'm like, do you want more kids? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, then we shouldn't keep going down this path. Like we need to find a new path.
Yeah. Right.
You know?
Yeah. No, and I think it's only okay to admit that too, right? Like if it's too much to have dogs and humans. I was going to say dogs and cats. I meant to say kids.
Sometimes it's too much to have dogs and cats too. Help get those people as well.
True. But if it's too much for you to have the animals plus the kids, there is the option to rehome the dogs. You can't really rehome the kids as easily.
I'm laughing at your cat. This is hilarious.
I know, she's podcast kitty.
Sorry, I didn't mean to distract, but she's just hilarious.
Yeah, no, she's been making a ruckus this whole time. And usually if my daughters are here, I'll be able to like grab her. My daughters are at their mom's, I co-parent. And I can grab her and then I can like mute it and I can yell for one of them to come and grab the cat and take it to their room with them. And I don't have that luxury today.
It's okay. And it's very entertaining.
But then I feel bad because then I put her in the bathroom. I know, she's great. She's super cute. But anyways, what was I saying?
Sorry.
Yes, it's okay to admit you're fine. It's okay to admit that I can't do this with the dog. This dog is too much. Maybe the dog's not the right fit with the kid, or the kid's not the right fit with the dog. And so you have to make a choice, and that choice is going to be the kids, unfortunately. And then you have to go about rehoming the dog. And that's okay. Mm-hmm. That's okay. I've rehomed a dog. Mm-hmm. I had this great little, I adopted him. It was when I lived in Arizona. I remember his name was Rex. He was like a healer terrier mix. He was one of these high energy dogs. I loved him so much. He was so cute. He was so fun. But he just didn't fit with our family at all. Tried it for a few months, and then we found this awesome farm nearby, like a small farm kind of thing, and they had lots of room. They had lots of energy. They had some sheep. They had some cattle. They had just a lot, and he was like the perfect fit for them, right? He fit in perfectly with them, not with us, with them. And so we rehomed him. It sucked. Felt guilty about it. But at the same time, it's like I know that he's going to be so much better off being there than with us in our situation right now. Like it sucks,
for sure.
But that's his best for him, right? And so that's, but then that was an adjustment, right? We had our older dog too. We had our golden retriever at the time. Still, and she mentioned you could tell in her kind of body language, like, oh, I went from having a friend to no friend. Like, that was my little doggy, and I was taking care of him, and I raised him, and now he's gone, kind of thing. So she went through like some, adjusting and whatnot, but she still had the kid that turned into a toddler, so she was happy and whatnot. She was really well taken care of. She was great. And yeah, so
it's okay, a lot of times
there's nothing wrong with it.
Oh yeah, there's nothing wrong, and a lot of times I end up kind of being the go-between between like the partners. And, one is like, I feel very strongly that this needs to happen. And then the other one's like, but I love the dog. And they're like, but you're not caring for the dog because you're gone all day, or this, and that, the other. And I'm like, I have to kind of help them see the other side. And I always end with, we move at the pace of the slowest member of the pack. So like if the person who needs to be prioritized in this situation is not the person who thinks everything is fine. It's the person who thinks everything is not fine. Because I know people who had 2 dogs that fought. So their solution was to sleep in separate bedrooms. Do you think after 10 years of sleeping in separate bedrooms, when those dogs died, do you think their relationship got any closer? Or do you think for 10 years they practiced separation and then it just stayed that way? And it's like,
yeah, people will. They never got to have a better relationship.
And I'm not saying that like if you sleep in separate bedrooms, your relationship is doomed. There's a lot of people who do sleep in separate bedrooms and their relationship is better because of it. But in this case, they had practiced so much separation because they were like, well, this is my dog and this is my dog. And I'm like, well, that's not a family unit. Then that's like roommates, right? Like you do nothing together. Everything is separate. You know, and that's really tough on a relationship. So it's kind of like when I go in and I meet a family, you got to look at all of the pieces. Like there's no one, it's never just the dog. Yeah. It's, you know, the relationship. And it's so funny. Sometimes I'll meet a dog and I'm like, they're a mirror image of one of the owners, like not how they look, but like their behavior. And they're like, the dog is just very particular. And I'm like, you are very particular. Like their traits are really similar. So dogs can be sponges too, as well as kids. But yeah, I think rehoming is an important topic, and it can happen because of mental health. It can happen because the dog is not a good fit for the family. And it can also happen because the dog actually presents a potential danger to the family. And all three of those are equally important reasons. I think when the dog doesn't have behavior challenges and the primary caretaker is like, oh, I just feel very overwhelmed by all of this. Like, I think because there's no direct threat, they feel like that is a less important reason to rehome the dog. But if you're not providing for the animal, you're not doing it any favors, you know? So if you let it go to a family that can fulfill it, then you're now opening a vacancy in your home for a dog that might be a better fit. And it all kind of moves full circle, but it's really hard because I think we have such a like rescue culture with dogs. Well, there's like two polarizing, it's like two very polarizing sides of adopt, don't shop. Like, yeah, I meant they're like, I didn't just like when I wanted a dog, I didn't just go adopt any dog. Like I didn't walk down to the shelter and pick anything. Like I still had a set of requirements of what I wanted. And it took a long time to find it. Yeah. But I also wasn't like so committed to the idea of rescuing that I would have brought a bad fit into my home. And then you have, you know, like the breeder side of things. And my hope is that, I mean, yeah, I would love for every dog to have a home that's in the shelter system right now. But that's not real life. It's a bigger problem than just like one thing. And, you know, I wish that I could get people to see that, like, if they do have a dog that has severe behavior problems and something like behavioral euthanasia is really the only option on the table, that they have done their humanitarian effort and done everything that they can for the dog. And if this dog isn't safe to be rehomed somewhere and that's not an option and they have to do that, you know, there is room to save a life that is waiting to be saved also. And so like I did have a client who was like, my dog bit my 8-month-old baby on the head. And a dog trainer said they would do a package and it's like $10,000. And I was like, I'm going to put my profession aside for a second. Like as a mother, no, that animal's not staying in my house. As a dog trainer also, no, the dog's not staying in my house. And I was like, there is no amount of money you can pay to change your relationship with your dog. You can only do that yourself. And the dog had done a litany of other things. They had lost their homeowner's insurance because it bit someone. There was a lot of things that had led up to this moment. They're like, we brought home the baby. The dog immediately got in the baby's face and growled. And I was like, that's when you should have called. That was bad sign number one. Right? But people don't know. They think it'll get better. And, you know, I was like, do you want to have, there's so much more than just like the dog and the baby's relationship. Like, do you want to have a birthday party here in which your kid has friends over? Do you like, the dog has bitten everyone who comes into the house. So like, you'll never have a play date. The cousins will never come over to play. Like, you're not just sacrificing the dog being in your, like, if you keep the dog, you're not just hyper vigilant in managing the two of them. You're also sacrificing a lot of things that may be important to you that can cause you to feel resentful towards the dog down the line. But like they ended up being able to give it back to the rescue, and I don't know what the rescue did with the dog, but I was like, it's not just the money or the training sometimes. Like, sure, can you get to a place where like you have enough management in your home where they don't hurt each other, but like having kids is a lifestyle. It's not just the day to day.
Yeah. No, absolutely. No, absolutely. And I think that's important too. Like you got to think like long term too. And you got to think like okay, if we keep this dog and then we lose our homeowner's insurance, if something happens to the home, then we're kind of SOL there, and then we don't have money to get a new home, or then we're sacrificing all these things you mentioned, right? Birthday parties and family gatherings, and hosting Thanksgiving. And I always wanted to host Thanksgiving because I thought it'd be really fun. We got this house; it's beautiful. I really want to host Thanksgiving here, but no, I can't host Thanksgiving because this dog is stressed, he bites everyone, and then if everyone gets bit, no one's ever going to want to come over again. It's going to damage our family relationships, all these things like that. Like, you have to have these conversations, right? Like, you have to have these conversations, and you got to be willing to have these conversations and to talk about these things and to be open, just be open about them, right? It's got to be open, and that's important. So, yeah, no, I agree on that. Last question here, and then we'll wrap this thing up. When integrating a cat into the home, I'm not asking for myself, but integrating a cat into the home. Let's say you got a couple kids and you got a couple dogs, and then let's say your partner wants a cat and you get a cat and you had the cat for about a month, and now the cat's very curious about these dogs. So in our setup here, the dogs are behind a baby gate, and they have this little area in our place to where they just kind of get to roam around. So I had them in a kennel for a long time. The kennel, I felt bad, like them being in the kennel together. It was a big kennel, but 55. And my Australian Shepherd Lab mix, he is like the biggest end of the spectrum, right? So normally Australian Shepherds are about like 35 to 45 pounds, right? And they have like 12 and a half inch shoulders, right? This dude grew to be so big so quickly that he is 55 pounds, 60 pounds. So he is bigger than your average Shepherd Lab mix. He has bigger shoulders. He's like 16-inch shoulders, and he's just a beast. He's an absolute animal, and I knew it from the very first time I took him to the dog park that he was going to be bigger, because the very first time he went to the dog park, when he was probably, I don't know, 6-7 months old, I started taking him there young, because that's one thing I told myself, like, I'm going to integrate this dog with other dogs young. He's going to get along with other dogs. He's going to play. He would go and find the biggest freaking dog he could at 6 months old and start roughhousing. He would get destroyed at the dog park time and time again. But no, he grew to be just this massive little Shepherd Lab mix. Like, he's so big. Like, when he's fully, I'm 6 foot. When he's fully stretched out, I could put his paws on my shoulder, and he's still on the ground. Like, he is long. He's a big dog. He's huge. But he's thick. He's tough. So I have him. I think he's great. My wife, not so much. That's another question too I had here. Like, when you're single and you get remarried, the dog's used to having only so many humans in the home, and then all of a sudden there's this new person, right? There's this new partner. There's this new person in the home that's moved in. New clothes, new smell, new everything, new routines, things like that. And things change for the dog. And he does not listen to her worth a damn. No matter how many times she's tried. And she is just like, he just doesn't listen to me at all. And so that's another thing. But back to the cat thing. Now they're very curious for each other, where she goes through the baby gate or she jumps over the baby gate to go into the dog area, and she just kind of sits there. And they just kind of all sit there at opposite sides from each other, and they just kind of stare at each other. They don't approach. They approach and then they disengage. She doesn't get her claws out. She doesn't hiss at them or anything. And so I'm like, are they good to try to just like interact more and like hang out now? Like, are they cool with each other?
It sounds like it.
Getting aggressive.
No, I think that I would keep the gate up so the cat can, like, if the dog decides to chase the cat, which I don't know the temperament of the dog, if the dog has lived with cats. If the dog's lived with cats before, I think you're fine. But if it was cat. Like the first cat. Oh, that's the first cat. I mean, I would just leave the gate up, and like some of them even have like a little cat door, but if he can jump over, you're probably fine. Or if she can jump over, you're probably fine. But having a place where they can escape to
yourself through the bars.
Yeah, I think you're good. I think that you could I would leave the gate up so they have a space where the dog can't get to. But it sounds like you're well on your way. Like, especially if they're engaging and then taking breaks and then engaging. That's what I like to see. Like, even if it's a dog that's like learning how to socialize with other dogs, because it's like over interest can be a problem. And then also like you want them to have a relationship, so you don't want them to like completely ignore each other. But it sounds like the cat's like, "Hey, friend, you want to be friends?"
Like, yeah. Well, that's with the big dog. But then with the Chihuahua, he just is just like, I think it's just Chihuahuas. He's just like scared. He just like doesn't approach. He like takes a step toward her, and then she moves a little bit, and then he retreats.
And he's working up the courage to say hello.
He's such a little bitch. I'm telling you, he is the biggest. He's such a little bitch.
We had a 6-pound Pomeranian, and he was the meanest dog ever. He bit my thumb so hard when I was like grooming him, and he turned around and bit me, and my thumbnail fell off. This was a long time ago, back in his prime, but yeah. And then he was like, by the time he passed away, he was like 5.5 pounds, but he only loved my husband. That was it. Like his whole life, the only thing that brought him joy was to like be in the arms of my husband like a baby. Like anything else was like, he's like, I'll just exist over here alone. And I'd be like, Coda, I love you. And he's like, it's fine.
That's hilarious. And then the other issue I'm facing, and I don't know how to remedy this one. So my bigger dog, I feels like all my issues sometimes are with him. So he's 3 now, right? So he's a little bit older. He's kind of out of those puppy years, right? And he's definitely into his dog years, right? And we have our fenced backyard, but where we live, so we rent, and part of the fence has this gap. And to fill this gap, I've had to put a table, like a folding table, into this gap to kind of keep it like off limits and to like board it off essentially, right? But he still gets up over the table somehow and then out through that way after being in the backyard all day. And this is not a small backyard, like it's a good backyard, but he gets
like
out
he'll
constantly.
Depart.
And so I'm
an adventure.
Yeah, like he leaves, and then there's like this little gap behind a shed, and then there's a gap in the fence there that he crawls out under, but then he can't come back in. So it's like, what the heck? Like, what does that mean? Like, why does he keep doing this?
Because it just sounds like it gives him something to do. So he's probably like, even if the yard is big, he's probably like, well, I've done everything there is to do here, so I'm going to just leave. To fix it, I mean, it's really hard if you don't see it happening. So like if you're gone and he's doing it while you're gone, really the only option would be for...
he's just outside, because he spends like all day outside. They spend from all day outside. Unless it's really cold out, then I'll bring him in for the day. But if it's nice enough out, they'll be outside from morning till night. You know,
I would
so
probably just
energy off and...
like a table, like he can jump on it and then he gets out, or he's going underneath.
No, he just like jumps. So it's like a folding table, right? And it's like folded in half, and it's like put there as like a blocker. But he gets up over it. I would assume he gets up over it. So I've tried to put stuff behind it, and then that stuff falls. So then he sees that he can get over it and out, and I'm just like, what the heck?
Maybe just do like plywood instead. So it's like, is he catching like the lip of the table? Do you think?
No, he can.
Or he can just clear it.
I'm pretty sure he can just clear it.
Oh,
if he wants to.
I know people who have huskies that can get out of anything, and they have to put these, they're called coyote rollers, over the top of the fence. And basically it's so like when their feet get up there, it rolls, but it's like a bar with like a thing that spins. They're called coyote rollers. It's to keep coyotes out of your yards, but people use it to keep their huskies in. Because huskies are also escape artists.
So he's basically, he's not trying to leave because he wants to come back. He just sees it as something to do, and then what you're saying is he just sees it as something to do, but then he's just like staring at the fence trying to figure out how to get back in. But he can't figure out how to get back in.
You'll have to work on it, like sit out there. Like for me, the options are like use a crate during the day so he can't get out of the crate. But if he's out there and he's going to the bathroom because he needs to access the bathroom and stuff, that's important. And if he's enjoying being outside, or if you're going to teach that like they need to keep a perimeter and you want that association to last when you're not there, I would look at something like an electronic collar where like anytime he goes towards that part of the fence, you hit the button so he learns that that's like a negative association to go to that part of the fence.
Gotcha.
So that is kind of one of the only ways to do it, so that it's reinforced when you're not there. So they're like,
gotcha.
I mean, that's why like a lot of people will use like an in-ground electronic fence, like in the Midwest. I'm not sure where you're at now, but like when I go back to like Illinois or Indiana, everyone has like perimeter in-ground fences. And it's so funny because the dogs will like charge from the front door because they'll see someone and they're like, want to run to the street, but they know exactly where the fence line is. And then you think they're going to come for you. And then they hit like 3 feet before the curb and they just stop. And you're like, oh, that must be where the electronic fence is. So, I mean, really, it's one of the only ways to reinforce it if you're not there. If he can just clear it and he's not like jumping on something to get out, or you let him get out and then you put something on the other side and he can get back. That step.
Yeah,
so he can come back.
I'm going to have to get creative or something.
Oh.
There's a gap in the fence on the other side that's attached to one of the other other buildings right here. So he gets under that, and that's like, I can't do anything with that fence. Like, that's not
your fence.
Anything that's attached that I can do kind of thing. So it just sucks because it's such a gray area, more or less.
When you come home, is he just sitting out on the front porch, like waiting for you?
No, he's just like, well, when he does do it, like I got home the other night and I got home from work, picking up the kids and everything, got home and I just see him on the wrong side of the fence roaming. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
You're out again.
And so I have to drive around the block and go and grab him and get him in the car and then drive back home. And he has to do the walk of shame and all that fun stuff. So,
well, I hope you can figure it out. Poor guy.
I know. I know. Well, I appreciate you letting me be selfish and ask you a couple of my questions for myself.
No, that's questions. That's what I'm here for.
And so our very last question here, and then I promise we're going to wrap this thing up. What advice would you offer to a young dad or a young mom, especially those who are expecting a baby and have a dog at home, to ensure a safe and loving environment for both their child and their pet? So just one piece of advice to ensure a safe and loving environment.
My advice is to start before baby arrives and know what you want together. Decide together what the rules are and remember that you're on the same team.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, because we all are on the same team. Like the dog wants to help. The dog wants to be a part of it.
They're like, I'm trying to help you. And we're like, I'm trying to sleep. And they're like, well, let me help you.
Let me help you sleep. Come on. Take me outside. Come on. Let me help you. You're stressed. You need to get some energy out.
Exactly.
Well, Eileen, thank you. Yeah, let me help you. Help me to help you. So, Chris, thank you so much today for your invaluable insights and experiences and sharing your insights and experiences with us today and with my listeners and with my audience. Your work is truly doing a great job of bridging the gap between parenting and pet ownership, because it's something that you don't really think about until you're in it and you're like, oh shit, I didn't think about this. So it's a good part of preparation. If you have a dog and you're having a baby, you need to start prepping. And I know our listeners will benefit greatly from your expertise and from listening to our podcast today, with all of our rambling and our tangents included. For those interested in learning more about Eileen, Baby Pack Leader course, or seeking guidance on integrating dogs and children, where can they go to find this?
babypackleader.com. And then we have an Instagram too, where I share videos of the puppy and the 3-year-old we were just talking about and kind of their adventures together and all the people that I help. So those are the main 2 places, babypackleader.com, which will take you to everywhere. And then our Instagram, babypackleader.
Perfect. I love it. And you'll of course be tagged and linked and all the things in the description of the episode and all that fun stuff. Awesome. And of course, to our listeners, thank you all for tuning into the Young Dad Podcast. Make sure you go and leave 5 stars, leave a review, like, follow, subscribe, all the things wherever you're at. Do the things you can to show the love of the podcast here. And until next time, take care, embrace the journey, and give your furry friends a hug for me.